Happy Thursday to one and all. I'm going to skip the entire opening. There's an old saying and an old thought process which sometimes, unfortunately, seems to happen, which is that celebrities seem to die in threes. And it's such a grim thought process. The first I heard of it, as crazy as this seems, was in the movie The Deadpool, the fifth and final, Clint Eastwood Dirty Harry film. That one was pretty good. It's not the best. The original's the best. But if somebody tells me they think that the Deadpool is the second best of the five, I'm not going to put up much of an argument. I mean, Sudden Impact is okay. The Enforcer is probably the weakest of the five. And there are those that think that Magnum Force is every bit as good as the original. The Deadpool has Jim Carrey. It has Liam Neeson. They were both on the rise in supporting roles. But the Deadpool gets into the idea of celebrities seeming to pass away in threes. And that movie is now 37 years old. It was not something that I had heard of as a 15, 16-year-old kid. And then it became more and more of something that people would talk about. And it is really terrible that Generation X, three people who, for entirely different reasons and in different walks of life, but all in the entertainment arenas, passed within 4-day stretch, 5-day stretch. Ozzy Osbourne, Malcolm Jamal Warner, and now Terry Gene Bollea, otherwise known as Hulk Hogan. Now, I'm not going to, that I don't try to get controversial here, the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind. I'm not going to judge Hulk Hogan, the man. I never met him. I know people who knew him, but I'm just going to talk about how I saw him and the cultural, there are people who we can say are, let's say, well, he wasn't that great of a guy. And there is an old saying, great men are seldom good men. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that one. I think it was the writer Nick Meyer, he talked about that, and he said he tried to work it into a whole bunch of different books and screenplays. He said I always ended up deleting it. But love him or hate him or somewhere in between, the man formerly known as Terry Gene Bollea and ultimately Hulk Hogan changed sports entertainment. He really did. He was a professional wrestler, and a great entertainer, and a guy who knew how to play to the crowd. He knew how to, if again you want to get political, he knew how to play to his base, but he also knew how to play to the people who hated him. And I understand it's a lot different hating a politician versus hating a professional wrestler in 1985. But as a mid-range Generation Xer, my date of birth, I am almost right smack dab in the middle of what is generally considered to be Generation X, 1965 to 1979. It's usually somewhere in that ballpark, sometimes 66 to 80, but you understand what I'm saying. Mid-range Gen Xers now are in their late 40s, early 50s. This is a true statement. So I first heard of Hulk Hogan. My parents took me to see Rocky III. The only Rocky movie that I saw in theaters, Rocky III. Well, the first Rocky came out, I was literally 2. The second Rocky came out, I was 5. And I guess my father was a fan of the first 2 Rocky films, I guess. I don't know, my mom was a boxing fan, but I don't remember the mechanics of how we ended up seeing Rocky III at the Pequot Theater in Massapequa, the theater. The last film shown there was from a big hitter, Francis Coppola's Tucker, The Man in His Dream. And I used to joke around that it was a New York Knicks Trent Tucker, and the dream was the fact that Tucker was going to win the 3-point contest that year, which he didn't end up winning. But we saw Rocky III at the Pequot Theater, and all I knew was that, Rocky had won the title. I had seen Rocky II on HBO with my father sometime before that. And Rocky was the champ, and that Mickey, and I don't know that if I was aware of the previews, but it was going to be that Rocky is now the champ. And I kept hearing this song just before the film came out, right around, if I'm not mistaken, Memorial Day weekend of 1982. Eye of the Tiger by a group called Survivor. And that song still cooks. That's a really good tune. It has a good message, a message of motivation, inspiration, and how to find your own personal magic. He talked about this with Robin Williams the other day. Your own personal magic. If you lose it, how do you get it back? The eye of the tiger. But I didn't know anything other than Rocky is the champ, and now he's going to defend his title. And then I saw a commercial with this kind of really scary looking guy, I thought. What's his name? Lawrence Turiad, his real name, Mr. T. Now, the backstory on that is that there was some talk. Sylvester Stallone wanted Ernie Shavers to play the character that ended up being Clubber Lang, and supposedly Stallone sparred with Shavers, and Shavers, who was known as the hardest hitter in boxing history, almost killed poor Sly. So you know what? No thank you. Let's have a non-boxer, not a fucking killer in the ring, and they got Mr. T, and that worked out great. But before all that, when Rocky, early in the film, you see that he's enjoying his millionaire lifestyle, he's getting soft, all of this sort of cultural shit that they're going into 43 years ago. It's all there, and it didn't make any impression on me at all. But he takes part in this charity event, our intrepid Robert Rocky Balboa. And he gets into the ring with a professional wrestler named Thunderlips. Now, you can go back right now, because I think the Rocky movies, they were streaming free. I know they were all streaming free on Paramount for a time. I'm sure you can find Rocky 3 free somewhere. Maybe free on Tubi, maybe it's on Prime. I know that not that long ago, all the Rocky films were on one streamer, and I'm not sure. It wasn't Disney. But Terry Gene Bollea, aka Hulk Hogan, plays this enormous wrestler named Thunderlips. And it's just such a perfect name for a guy who looks like Hulk Hogan of that era. And you go back and you watch that and you tell me if Hogan doesn't already look like he's at least 40. He was the oldest looking guy in his 20s in the history of the universe, as far as I'm concerned. He already looked like he was retirement age, and this movie is 43 years old. But it is not a stretch to say Hogan's turn as Thunderlips. He does his usual shtick that he ended up doing when he was a heel with the New World Order of Wrestling, brother. He does that. That's a heel character of Thunderlips. But his scenes with Stallone are great. And the charisma of the man, whether he was, the face that he played for so many years in the WWF and then the WWE, or the heel that he started off when he had, what was his name? He wrestled as Sterling Golden. Like, he had different names that he used. Terry Hulk Hogan, he sometimes was known as in Hollywood. But he had an unmistakable charisma. And obviously, from a physical standpoint, a very impressive guy in I was going to say sport, but in an area of sports entertainment, where there were a lot of enormous bodybuilder types. Hulk Hogan was still pretty fucking impressive. He's a big dude. And you think about Dwayne Johnson's father, Rocky Johnson, and how, he was enormous. And Tony Atlas, his training partner back in the day, Mr. USA. There were so many guys who were jacked. The fact that Hogan didn't have, he wasn't cut like Rick Rude, but Hogan was legitimately 300 plus pounds, and he was in good shape. So yeah, he wasn't shredded, but in order to do what he did as a wrestler, when he kind of dovetailed from Rocky 3, and he did some wrestling in Japan, the Von Erichs, there was a little bits of that in the Iron Claw, but he got put over because of Rocky 3, put over being a wrestling turn when somebody kind of hits the big time. Another thing that was mentioned in the Iron Claw, when Fritz Von Erich was almost a little frustrated when his son Kerry, comes home, and he makes a seemingly stray comment, which was not a stray comment, it was for people like me who were wrestling fans in the 80s and 90s. He says, I hear it looks like they're putting your old training partner Hellwig over. He's talking about the Ultimate Warrior. We'll get to him. But Hogan went from Thunderlips in Rocky 3. It raised his Q. It raised his kind of Q factor, his visibility factor. And the Hulkster got to, at the time, the WWF, and he was primed to become their biggest star, and that's exactly what happened. You had this weird angle, and most of the angles that McMahon came up with back in the day, you look back on them now, you see, my God, this was not a good idea. It got fannies in seats, it got people excited. But for the same reason that Sylvester Stallone, when he went back into the editing room and redid Rocky IV, there was, even for Sly, there was too much of what we would call jingoism. It was too much of the us against them, and we hate these guys and we hate that guys. It was just too much of that kind of shit. So the whole angle where Bob Backlund, who was a real, kind of good old boy, and a really great technical wrestler, and he loses to the evil Iron Sheik, and then here comes Hulk Hogan, who, in later years, in the early 2000s, put the mask on and he was Mr. America. Really funny shit. But the Hulkster won the WWF title, I think it was January 1984, and I remember, I didn't see it live, but I was in 4th grade, Fairfield Elementary, for those Massapequans among you, and I mean, people were really excited about it. Now, I was told by the time I was 9, this is not real. People always said wrestling was fake. I could see with my eyes that these guys were really good athletes. But there was a part of me that wanted to believe that these matches were real. They really were wrestling each other, and it was a sport, and this was not just for entertainment's sake. And it's not just that the guys were great athletes, because we can see that they are. But Hogan took the sport into the stratosphere. He was the primary mover. As much as Ric Flair was doing his thing in the old NWA, and Rick Martel, who was later the model in the WWF, WWE, they were doing they were having great matches in the NWA and the AWA. Hogan was limited in terms of his kind of technical skill set. He was not known as a great technical wrestler, but he was a guy who knew how to play to the crowd, and he would do the same run-up. He had the exact same last series of moves, and I don't even know how many hundreds of matches, because you think about how many house shows these guys do per year. But Hogan made wrestling, made it cool, made it fun, and I really started to get into it right around that time, let's say the summer of 1984, as there was the slightest inklings that Vince McMahon Jr. was going to try to market this and make a bigger deal out of it than it was and than it had been. And so in the run-up to what became the first WrestleMania, that was when my wrestling fandom, if you will, was at its peak. Every single wrestling show that was ever on the old TBS, I used to watch NWA. They had like the Saturday night show, which was usually just faces versus jobbers, heels versus jobbers. There were never any good matches, but they would just come out there and they would promote, upcoming matches where you might have to pay, go to wherever, Nassau Coliseum to see this, or go here for that. And it was a lot of the funny stuff that you see on social media where, Ric Flair, the Rolex wearing, diamond ring wearing, kiss stealing, jet flying son of a gun, all that stuff. And Hulk Hogan, there was a Saturday morning show on the old WOR where he's carrying on, he's yelling and he's screaming about all of this shit. And it was just a lot of fun. And I remember in the run-up to the first WrestleMania, this kind of grudge match, if you will, where Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper, they had a feud. Roddy Piper, of course, is somebody who also died way before his time. He was in his middle 60s, if that. He passed. Roddy's been gone, man, he's been gone a decade. That's crazy. But I was at WrestleMania. I was at the first one. I was at the second one, which was split into 3 arenas. I was at the second one at Nassau Coliseum. It started there, and that was Mr. T versus Roddy Piper in a boxing match, which didn't look like any boxing match I've ever seen. But here's the important personal note on Hulk Hogan. I hated Hulk Hogan. I never rooted for Hulk Hogan. I rooted for him to lose. Now, I don't know what that says about me. Is it just that I was a crank? I was just an angry kid? But I rooted against Hulk Hogan his entire run in the WWF, WWE. I was rooting for the six-man, no, it wasn't a six-man tag, it was a regular tag team match. The climactic match of the first WrestleMania was at March 31st, 1985. I would have been 11, Jesus. Muhammad Ali, special guest referee, my single favorite historical figure. And there's pictures of him and Hogan, you know, from before when they were kind of promoting it. But I wanted Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff, who also has passed, I wanted them to win. And I was really disappointed when they lost, when Hogan, you know, a double count, whatever it was. You knew that it wasn't going to be anything other than, you know, a lot of in-net brawling and people throwing these roundhouse punches at each other. But wrestling just kept ascending, and the amount of money, presumably, that McMahon was making when he started Saturday Night's Main Event, which would once a month, instead of Saturday Night Live, instead of showing a rerun, they would have a wrestling card, and it was always top-end stuff, title matches, or, you know, some kind of face turn, heel turn, you know, the Mega Powers Explode with Randy Savage and all of that kind of stuff. But I never rooted for Hulk Hogan. I always rooted for him to lose. In general, I rooted for the bad guy wrestlers, but then there were certain good guys. Like I liked Tito Santana, and I liked Jesse Ventura. I liked that Jesse was always ragging on Hogan. Even then, I know that, you know, Jesse had problems with Hogan later, because when Jesse tried to unionize so that they could get paid more money, and Hogan kind of ratted him out to McMahon, and so Jesse, they were friends, even though they had a feud, but the feud was part of the storyline. But Jesse had the great crack at Hogan whenever Hulk, for all those years, would come into the ring and, you know, rip the t-shirt. Jesse always said the same thing: boy, is he tough, he can tear a t-shirt. You know, and I hope that if Jesse says something, I hope that there is a little bit of a good memory, as opposed to the fact that they apparently, I don't think they spoke in years. When Jesse was on with Graham Bensinger, this is probably many years ago, but he said something to the effect of, because Bensinger asked him, if Hulk reached out to apologize to you, would you take the call? And I don't remember if Jesse said he would. I think he said he would, but he was implying, I can't ever forgive the guy. I can't forgive him. You know, what do you want me to say? But WrestleMania, enormous box office. WrestleMania 2, even more. It was in 3 arenas, and at climax, Hogan was not in New York. He was in Los Angeles, and it was a cage match between him and King Kong Bundy, who they were kind of promoting to maybe be the next champion, and that didn't happen. And then WrestleMania 3, the first pay-per-view event that I ever saw, that we ever ordered at home. My mother ordered it. I think she paid something like $60 in 1987 for WrestleMania 3 at the Pontiac Silverdome, supposedly 93,000 people in attendance. And that was a great event. But if we look at the wrestling, the only really good match is the famous Randy Savage versus Ricky Steamboat, and that was an interesting feud, the kind of angle that they went at. This was when Macho Man was he was purely a heel at that stage of his career in the WWF. But that's a great match because it almost looks real. And when you have two guys who are so skilled that they can almost make it seem as if they're having a real wrestling match, that's what that was. The rest of the card is just, I mean, it's okay. And the final match, unfortunately, you know, Andre the Giant and Hogan, they had a little bit of a contentious friendship, but they had been allies over time. And then Andre turned heel. He went with Bobby the Brain Heenan, and they had this match. But unfortunately, by the early part of '87, Andre was really not doing well physically. And he had shot his scenes already sometime earlier for The Princess Bride, where he's obviously wonderful. That's just a great movie. But he couldn't do that much in the ring anymore. And as a result, the match with him and Hogan, it wasn't as good as it would have been if it had been a couple of years earlier when Andre, for example, when he went against John Studd in the first WrestleMania, you look at Andre's movements in that one versus just 2 years later. He can barely move in WrestleMania 3. So I was crushed because I was still convinced maybe it was real when Hogan beat Studd. When Hogan beat Andre. And it was just awful. And, you know, I guess then Hulk wanted to do something else. He wanted to just not be the champ, and all the adoration with the kids, you know, the prayers, the vitamins, all of the motivational stuff that he was doing. I kind of lost interest in wrestling starting in 87 into 88. So I guess you could say I was only a diehard fan maybe for three and a half years. And I didn't ignore it after that, but the fact that it was fixed, or that it was, choreographed, we can say that. I don't know. It lost its appeal. It lost its appeal to me. And I know that Hogan, obviously people love to talk about when he, with the NWO, when he was the third man, and he famously turned his back on all the little Hulksters, all the little Hulkamaniacs, and he became a bad guy wrestler again, because he started as a bad guy wrestler in the early 80s. He was mostly playing heel characters when he was in his mid to late 20s. And then with the NWO, and he had the dark beard and the sunglasses and all of that stuff. I mean, I wasn't really watching, but I knew people who were, and they loved it. Even if they had been fans of Hulk Hogan proper, in his first run, they just loved the fact that, man, he looks good with that beard, whatever it was. And in 1996, he wasn't as old as he seemed. The guy was 43 when he turned heel. This will be the new world order of wrestling, brother. All this crap in the ring represents these fans out here, and there's one guy cheering. I mean, that was one of the great moments in the history of wrestling right there. All this crap in the ring represents these fans out here. But Hogan changed. He changed sports entertainment. He really did. And this is why when people talk about Mount Rushmore, Mike Tyson talking about a boxing Mount Rushmore, not surprisingly, he chose only heavyweights, and Shaq was even asking Shaq's co-host, this was recently on Shaq's podcast, where the co-host said, Mike, can Mike put himself on Mount Rushmore or something like that? Mike would never do that. But Shaq said, Mike can make his own list. If he wants to put himself on there, he can. But Tyson went with the Mount Rushmore of boxing. He went Dempsey, Liston, Ali, and Foreman, which was, I guess a little bit surprising. But the Mount Rushmore of wrestling, even though Hulk Hogan is not Bret Hart, he's not Ricky Steamboat, he's not Randy Savage, who despite his size was an incredibly skilled practitioner. He's not Roddy Piper. He's not Ric Flair. But because of his visibility, his charisma, for better or worse, I think that Hogan is on the wrestling Mount Rushmore. I mean, Flair is the only one that everybody would agree, and maybe Flair and Bret Hart. But you get past Flair and Bret Hart because they were good practitioners. And in the case of Flair, he had stretches where in certain areas he was a heel and other areas he was a face. There was a Pro Wrestling Illustrated, which I used to get every month as a kid. They talked about who were the 10 most popular wrestlers, who were the 10 most hated, and Ric Flair appeared on both lists in the mid-'80s. That I like. That depending on which territory, and Flair didn't change. He still cheated. As he said, the dirtiest player in the game. Even today, when he posts on social media, he likes to post old clips of him, using the ropes and ripping on somebody's face, or stuffing something down a guy's throat and then going like this to the ref, like, what, I didn't do anything? All great stuff. But it is sad. Hulk Hogan was only 71. I mean, this is a guy who was in the public eye from the time he was in his mid-20s. And I feel bad. He meant more to me, even though I rooted against him, always rooted against him. The only time, I almost forgot to say, the only time I ever rooted for Hulk Hogan was when he lost to the Ultimate Warrior. Spoiler alert, I think it was WrestleMania 5? Either 5 or 6. That was the only time I rooted for Hulk Hogan. Because I hated the Ultimate Warrior even more than Hogan. The enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. By that point, I did not despise Hogan as a wrestler anymore. I didn't just always root for him to lose. I thought the idea, and that was a great idea by Vince, putting two faces against one another for the title. I don't know why they didn't do it more often. I used to love when the NWA would do stuff like that, where they would have, two evil guys going against each other. And the WWF did something similar previously to great effect when they had Savage versus Jake the Snake Roberts, also a very good practitioner. Jake the Snake was really quick and clever in the ring. But, Hogan, the scandal in the mid-2000s with his friend Bubba the Love Sponge, with the wife and the video, all of that stuff was really bad. And I remember when his wife left him and he seemed devastated. And then there was that thing a number of years ago where Kurt Angle, and I don't think Kurt was playing an angle, I think he just had bad information, where he said, from my understanding, I don't know if Hulk's going to be able to walk again. And then it turned out he was. And we've seen him not that long ago, still, at least physically, looking great. He didn't look like a guy at the end. I mean, I hate to say Ozzy Osbourne wasn't really looking that good for the last number of years, but this seemed to be a shock that Hulk went downhill so fast in the last couple of weeks, because he looked good physically. He seemed healthy. The last few times I saw him interviewed, his eyes were clear. So, I don't know. You want to say the lifestyle, the amount of painkillers he no doubt had to consume just to get through his days, and the grind of being on the road. It's all really difficult. And it is unfortunate that there are so many wrestlers, and even Hogan, I don't know if he necessarily had financial troubles, but selling the beer and some of the other stuff that he was doing, and Ric Flair similarly having to promote certain products. You really wish that they had been able to unionize or something, so that these guys, when they get into their 60s and 70s, the amount of effort, the hard work, the being on the road, doing 200 matches a year, some of them a half hour. Ric Flair and Barry Windham in '86 fighting one match after another. Yeah, I understand they're choreographed. They were house shows. They're doing 1 hour where it hits the time limit. They're out there flying around for 60 minutes straight. And Hogan had stretches where he had one long, grueling match after another. And the older I got, the more respect I had for the guys in the ring. And there's a famous clip, maybe you've seen, where Roddy Piper was on with Steve Borden or Sting with Bill Maher. And this was a very young Bill Maher. He had the hair. And Maher was being, in this instance, and I know he's famous for being snarky, but he was not talking to Roddy Piper with the right level of respect. Because in Maher's mind, like me when I was a kid, but I was 10, well, it's fixed. But there's more to it. It's not just that it's fixed. There's a difference between it being fixed, being choreographed. And saying that it's choreographed, it feels more accurate, because these guys are giving it their all. And in the case of Hulk Hogan, yeah, he told a lot of fish stories. We know that. Interviews, saying a lot of weird stuff. That whole thing where he said he was offered the George Foreman grill before George Foreman. That's never been confirmed by anybody. And then there were a couple of movies. Oh, he said that he was offered the Mickey Rourke role in The Wrestler. That's also never been confirmed. So there's a lot of stuff that he said, and you go on social media, even without some of the other controversies, people say, I don't know why Hogan has to say all this nonsense. But, today, I'm just sad. Even though I never rooted for the guy, he was a big part of my childhood. Because I went to WrestleManias 1 and 2. I got to go to a lot of really exciting cards at Madison Square Garden and Nassau Coliseum. I watched so many nights of primetime wrestling, which was hosted by Jesse Ventura and the late, great Gorilla Monsoon, sometimes Bobby Heenan. And wrestling was a big part of my life for about 3.5 or 4 years. And I'm sorry that he didn't get to have a real retirement where he could, take it easy and not have to continue to grind to make money. But it wasn't to be. And rest in peace to Terry Gene Bollea, aka Hulk Hogan, gone at age 71. Gone but never to be forgotten. He really did advance wrestling to the next levels. This has been episode 585 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your late Thursday afternoon into Thursday evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then,